Hello and welcome to this aquaculture panel session looking at preventing and managing fish disease sustainably. My name is Elizabeth Sukkar and I lead on research projects at Economist Impact. Well, aquaculture is a rapidly growing food producing sector where production is around 82 million tons and is valued some $250 billion US. However, it is often hit by viral, bacterial and parasitic diseases with devastating consequences. It has been estimated that as much as 10% of all cultured aquatic animals are lost because of diseases. So disease is a key challenge for the aquaculture sector in the Asia-Pacific region. This session aims to discuss effective solutions for disease prevention and management to promote fish health. And I'm really pleased to welcome our panel today. Hello and welcome to Andreas von Scholten, Chief Executive, Barramundi Group, which farms barramundi and owns Uvax, a fish vaccine maker. Hi to Sophie St. Hilaire, Professor, Department of Infectious Diseases and Public Health at City University of Hong Kong. And hello to Kristin Veriga, Chief Marketing Officer at Grobest, which is a feed producer. And also, just to let you know, their full biographies are on the screen under this media player. Well, hello, and thank you for joining me today. I think I might start with you, Andreas, if that's okay. Your company deals with tropical fish, and you farm it in the ocean. And can you tell us what are the key fish diseases that you are seeing at the moment?
Thanks for that, Elizabeth, and thanks for having me here. Very excited to be on this panel and to join this discussion. You're right. Barramundi Group, we farm barramundi across multiple sites. So we operate farms in Singapore, Australia, and Brunei, and we really focus on an ocean farm system where we see that the fish are having tremendous growth and are able to grow in a very sustainable way there. However, though, we are experiencing obviously that as with any other feed producing or sort of protein producing company, we are experiencing that our fish are exposed to certain diseases. So in our case, and this diseases really vary across our different sites, but we have I think the usual suspects in tropical aquaculture with bacterial diseases, Streptococcus, Tenacibacilum, and several others. And we also have viral diseases, mostly relates to iridovirus. We also have a detected scale drop virus, which is a fairly new virus that has been found, and also herpes virus. So some of these viruses will have and bacterial diseases will have different impacts on the fish. Some will just really weaken the fish, meaning that it won't grow so much. That they're not all necessarily killing the fish, but they could make the immune system for the fish worse and be more susceptible for other infections from parasites, etc. So it's something that we are very, very obviously monitoring very carefully, and one of the reasons why we have our decided to develop a company that is specializing in making vaccines is because we believe that prevention rather than cure, and to make sure that our fish are being protected in the best possible way through vaccines prior to being sent to the ocean cages. So that is why we have been working with Uvax for so many years and have developed now a full suite of different vaccines to help the fish become as ready as they can for the life in the ocean.
Thank you for that, Andreas. And Sophie, can you talk to us about how quickly an infection can spread in a farm, and to what extent does the size of the farm and the number of fish infected play a part in all of this?
Sure. So I'm a veterinarian, and I have a practicing veterinarian in aquatic animal health. Currently, we provide a vet service for the farmers around Hong Kong, but I've worked in other places around the world. So I've seen several different cold water and warm water species and different pathogens that can be problematic in different species. The speed of which an outbreak can occur really depends on the pathogen that is involved, the exposure level. So if it's a really high dose, more fish tend to get affected and it'll run through a system faster. The health of the host. As Andreas has mentioned, if you have healthy fish or immune fish, then they can tolerate a lot higher dose exposure. And some pathogens, like viral pathogens, tend to go through a system faster in general than a bacterial or a parasitic pathogen. The temperature can also impact the speed and the magnitude of outbreaks. So as we see climate change, we see changes in the manifestation of different diseases. So that's what might drive some of these different size of outbreaks. The number of hosts on a farm can also impact the magnitude. So the more fish you have, the more hosts can get infected at one point in time, which may amplify a pathogen. If you've got a community of farms that are very close together, then you can share pathogens if there's sufficient signal from the farms. So that's what we've seen in some areas where you've got different farmers farming asynchronously, different species even. And so sometimes and maybe some lack of communication between farmers that share communal waters can ping pong, basically, pathogens. So that has been problematic, and it's quite hard to resolve, actually. So,
and Sophie, I mean, comparing ocean-based farming practices and land-based farming practices, which are seeing more diseases, or is it hard to say?
Well, it's hard. I'd say that the communal sharing of water is difficult to control entry of pathogens. So these open net pen systems, not only do farms share water, but you also share with all the wild fish, and you also get the pollutants from the coastal communities. So the environment may not be always the best. So the fish may be stressed because of that. So in a closed system, a RAS system, you can disinfect water. You can control your sources of water a bit better usually. So I'm going to say in general, I would say open net pen farming is more difficult to prevent infections with because of the nature of the systems.
Thank you for that, Sophie. And Kristin, I mean, a feed producer like Grobest, I mean, how do you help in tackling disease and improving fish health? It'd be great to hear your thoughts on that, and also differences between functional foods and, say, conventional foods.
Yeah, well, I guess we see it as actually primary to our mission is how do we contribute to reducing disease, and I think our philosophy is very much prevention is better than a cure, as like Andreas had laid out, and we do that in a number of different ways actually. So part of that is around farmer education and providing the right biosecurity advice, et cetera, on how they can structure their farms. And we've certainly seen a significant escalation in disease, so it's becoming a much more important part of our of the product and service that we offer. But primarily how we do that is through the biotech functional additives that are developed in-house. There are a number of specialist compounds that essentially deliver a number of different functional benefits, but primarily 3 of them do a very good job of boosting the natural immunity of the animal. And essentially what that does is it significantly reduces and eliminates the need for antibiotics. We don't prescribe for any antibiotic use across any of our farms, and we're able to show a significant delta in survivability. Particularly when we focus in on the shrimp diseases as much as fish. The shrimp diseases are extremely virulent. Sorry, and essentially you lose about 100% of the harvest in 5 or 6 days. And what we've been able to demonstrate is through a proactive use in functional feeds, we can actually we can reduce that by about 50% actually. So there's quite a significant difference, and we believe that's that's the right way to go, because essentially what you end up doing is you deliver significantly better survivability without antibiotics and without the environmental and the water footprint problems that come along with that.
Thank you for that, Kristin. I'm hoping we can just talk a little bit about outbreaks in the recent past and how the aquaculture sector has learned lessons from this. Andreas, maybe you can start us. Obviously, there was the salmon crisis in Chile in 2016. There's been the Asia shrimp prawn growers had a crisis regarding early mortality syndrome years ago. What does the aquaculture sector do after something like this? I mean, how do you kind of collaborate and learn from that process?
Yeah, no, these events are obviously disastrous and can have a very big impact on the producers that are exposed to this. And I think the ISA crisis in Chile was certainly one example where it was not just one company, but a whole range of companies that were infected. And I think the similar with I think EMS in the shrimp industry that also had a massive impact. So this is obviously something that I think collectively as an industry we don't want to see our animals dying, our fish dying, or so it's something that we are very mindful of, and I think all the more reasons why we have to be very mindful as producers that we are, to ensure that we provide the best environment for our fish to not be, I would say, put under an unnecessary stress or challenges as we grow the fish during the life cycle. So in our case, Barramundi is spending more than a year, a year and a half to 2 years in the water before we take it out. So obviously it's a very long cycle as opposed to shrimp, which is a much shorter cycle. So I think that is also I think a reason why we have fish welfare very high on the agenda, and so some of the things we can do is to ensure that the density levels in the cages are kept at a certain minimum, so that the fish have ample room to move. It is also, I mean, to Sophie's point, I think the thing about ocean, open net pens is right. It's all about. I mean, you are exposed to the water around you, so also selecting the sites are extremely important. That you are mindful about where you want to put your farms in places where you have adequate depths, adequate currents. As little as possible exposure to outside, I would say, influences. So there's a number of things we can do. But I think when these crises, and I think that was your question, when these crises emerge, I think that's when you really see the true impact of the researchers, of the various companies that work within fish health, shrimp health. In the case of the ISA crisis in Chile, I'm very, very proud to have worked with the company that developed the first vaccine for the industry some 10 years ago when I was in Pharmac. So that was one example of how an industry could very quickly gather around a problem, innovate, develop a vaccine, not too dissimilar to, I think, the COVID situation just now. And I think this is obviously when you have an industry that is crying, help us, then it's really up to the companies to rally around for everybody's, I would say, sake.
It's really interesting, thinking about a fish pandemic as such. But yes, Sophie, I'd love to hear your thoughts as an academic, how you see the aquaculture sector reacting to crises, and what solutions you would suggest going forward.
I'm sure. I just want to add a bit to Andreas's points. In Chile, when they had their ISAV crisis, which was a viral disease, it actually brought them together and made them reflect on their biosecurity and how to deal with managing in an open system. And a lot of new practices that have been actually used now for almost a decade were implemented because of that ISA crisis. So, for example, their area fallowing and their synchronized fallowing of their zones, their zoning system to start with, their neighborhoods, and their synchronization of their sea lice treatments. So they actually reflected a lot on their practices and tried to coordinate a bit more together, realizing that the virus was being spread between farms, and so it did help the industry grow. I think it also made them a little bit more aware of pathogen transmission. So.
Thank you for that. Kristin, did you want to add anything about how the industry copes with the crisis? What lessons have we learned so far?
I think the others have captured it quite well. I think in Thailand, probably the difference in Thailand with EMS, it really devastated the industry to the point where Thailand has never really recovered on the global stage from a total shrimp production standpoint. But there were certainly lessons learned and shared across. And what we're seeing now actually is the farmers, particularly the large farmers, are quite insular. They've got their best practice sorted out. They're probably not as open sourcing it like what was described that happened in Chile. People have got their system worked out, and some of them are closing off quite a lot. But then you see a lot of collaboration as well in other sectors. So it's a bit of a combination in Thailand. Probably wasn't as a real joint effort as it came across in Chile.
Thank you for that, Kristin. And I'd like to shift the conversation, and we've kind of been hinting at it, but the role of antimicrobials and what's actually happening in the Asia-Pacific region. Sophie, I think I might ask you to maybe start us off. I mean, how would you describe the state of play on the use of antimicrobials, antibiotics in the sector? I mean, how does it compare to Europe and LATAM? So, for example, in Europe, I don't think we're allowed to use colistin in veterinary medicine. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this and the others as well.
Sure. Well, I think in Asia, so we are part of the ambulatory service that we provide to the fish farmers was to address this point so that the use of antibiotics could be done under veterinary supervision. So with the diagnosis of a problem, and we could monitor the drug responses and the drugs that are used. And there are a couple of antibiotics that are more commonly used and licensed for some species, not all, but those are more routinely used. But because in Asia there's not as much regulations as in Europe on the use of these, it's difficult to know what practices are being used, to be honest. The other thing that I found that's very different here from North America, South America, and Europe is that the feed companies don't play a large role in incorporating medications for delivery. So there's a lot more hand mixing of medications, which means that the drugs aren't, well, you've got exposure from the farmer, you've got leaching because the products aren't properly coated. And so there's probably a lot more underdosing in Asia than in countries like Chile, where the farms are so large, and hand mixing is not legal. So they tend to have a better quality medicated feed, which means you're going to deliver that drug a lot better and more efficiently. You're not going to have as much environmental contamination. So those are some of the things that we see here. We monitor all of our any bacteria we find. We run a sensitivity analysis on it. So we're monitoring our practices as well as just environmental antibiotic resistance. And we do find it quite frequently. We actually find it in products that are very unlikely to be used in aquaculture. So there's a lot of other sources of antibiotics that enter the aquatic system that are probably driving AMR in the aquatic environment. For example, any sewage coming out, agricultural use of products. So it's difficult to pinpoint the precise source of AMR, but certainly the aquaculture industry plays some role in at least contributing to the antibiotics in the environment. Whether it's driving the AMR completely is, I don't know.
Thank you for that. I'd like to ask Kristin to come in on this point about the role of feeds and antimicrobial. I mean, we know antimicrobials can reach aquatic life directly from the feces of fish treated with antimicrobials, and as well as in feed preparations, and also as an additional waste stream from antimicrobials could result from uneaten treated feed. So love to hear your thoughts on that, like, I mean, what Grobest is doing and also what you're seeing happening in the Asia-Pacific region, Kristin.
Yeah, so at Grobest, we're 100% antibiotic free. We don't include any antibiotics in any of our feed or any of our additives or any of our water treatment. And then right across our SOPs, actually, we strongly advise to not use antibiotics. We have the data, and we've proven that our feed alone without antibiotics is able to offset disease at a significant rate, and therefore, we strongly advise not to do it because of water and because of the overall environmental damage, but also the quality of the animal, the quality of the final product, and so therefore we are 100% antibiotic free. That said, of course, there's lots of antibiotic use happening at the farm. Like Sophie said, there's not many feed players in Asia who are including antibiotics in the feed, but usage on the farm, hand mixing, et cetera, we do see that particularly when we start talking to some farmers who, we're interested to move over to Grobest. They're like, well, how can I manage my farm without the antibiotics? And so we have to take a real educational approach to what that's doing to the farm over time, and what's the benefit of not using the antibiotics. So clearly there's usage there, but I think one of our key passions actually, and one of the roles that we see is how do we drive lower use and zero use of antibiotics in aquaculture.
That's good to hear. Andreas, what's your take on it? I mean, how would you describe the state of play of antimicrobial use in Asia-Pacific region, and what your company is doing as well at the moment? Yeah, no, I think it's certainly an issue that has been a discussion for many years, and I think is a key focus. I think sad to say that I think that the industry as a whole is still using a fair bit of antibiotics. I think the issue is always the use of antibiotics. I think the practices in Asia Pacific, as I think Sophie was, I fully agree with that point, that it's not the farmers typically, and I'm generalizing here, but the small farmers are typically not so well educated and are not always aware of the implications of the use. So you'd see instances where farmers will be applying antibiotics for one day and then stop, which is exactly the wrong way to do it. If you really want to be successful, you need to continue the regime for probably 7 days to ensure that the disease is probably eradicated, and you don't risk any type of resistance coming up. So that's what we have seen quite a bit. But I think as I think that the way forward to me very clearly is vaccination, and that is the future. And also, hence, I'm very proud, obviously, to be driving that agenda with our company, that we have a focus on a policy to vaccinate all of our fish, regardless of geography, to really be, I think, on the forefront of this, and to limit the use of antibiotics wherever possible. I think existentially there's always the dilemma when you're faced with your whether it's a pig or a cow or any type of animal that is dying, you need to make a decision whether you just want to let it be, or you want to treat with antibiotics. But that is what we call very specific use, which is very different from the general use of antibiotics that is really a cocktail to be more preventative, which is, I believe, a very wrong way of applying it. So I think it a lot of details here, but I think that's I think our position. Andreas, I'd like to know a little bit more about the actual technique, because you use an intraperitoneal technique where you inject each fish individually. I mean, how cost effective is that? I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. And is that kind of a viable option for other farmers as well?
Yeah, so I think when I was first introduced to fish vaccination, my first reaction was, do we really vaccinate fish? Because I really didn't think that was possible. And then when I learned that all the fish that have been vaccinated are being injected, so every single fish is being taken up and injected either by a person or by a machine. So that is really the industry standard around the world. It's happening. I think pretty much 100% of all salmon in the world are vaccinated in Intraperitoneal, like we do. So we don't have a per se a unique way of vaccinating. It's really the way to ensure that when you do vaccinate, it gets in the abdomen, so it's being taken up in the most effective way, and you ensure that every single fish is getting the shot, as opposed to if you have a widespread, you're not sure if it's through feed or other ways. You're not really sure that all the fish are being immunized. So it's and I think if you run the numbers, and because of the impact of diseases, and not just in mortalities but also lower growth, etc., it is such a huge advantage for farmers to ensure that the fish are protected and vaccinated, so that it by far, I would say, justifies the cost, and not just the cost but also the complexity to have to vaccinate every single fish. So I would strongly advocate for vaccination.
Thank you for that. And I'm glad you got your hand up, Sophie, because I was going to ask you a question as well about obviously we have bacterial and vaccines against viruses, but what are the challenges around developing vaccines against parasites? I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And obviously, if you want to comment on what Andreas has just said as well.
Okay, so I'll start with just a comment on the vaccination. So in Asia, at least the areas where I'm involved with, we have fairly small farmers. So they have a problem with the economy of scale here. So they have and not only that, but they do try to grow high value fish so that vaccines are a possibility. But others, like the tilapia, they just can't. The IP vaccination is just too expensive for them. It can't. They can't make the economics work because they're small. So that's the other problem they have with preventing disease. Like, we've gone on farms with our textbook biosecurity manual, but they don't have enough fish to have enough profit to implement $1 million worth of biosecurity measures. That if you only do a few of the biosecurity measures, they don't actually, you have to have an all or none process here. Otherwise, you spend $1 million, but you still get infected. So they do have this issue that is really hard to work around. And that's actually what happened in Chile when they had ISA. A lot of the small farmers got bought out by the larger companies. So then the larger companies have the money to invest in the vaccines and to invest in the infrastructure to manage to have proper biosecurity. So I just want to mention that, because I mean, coming from a salmon industry before I came to Asia, of course, vaccination is the solution. But then when you work with these smaller farmers, also, they actually get infected quite young if they don't have proper, if their hatcheries aren't clean, then the infection occurs before they can vaccinate them, IP. So that's the other problem that we run into. Getting to your point about the parasites, it's very hard to develop vaccines against parasites, but I think that maybe Andreas could comment on that more scientifically than I can.
Andreas, if you want to, very briefly.
I think it's a very challenging technology to develop. I think it's still being tried with several companies. To my knowledge, there's not yet a commercial product out there. But I think it would be a tremendous advance if that were to be included in future vaccines for fish.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now, let's kind of talk about climate change and its impact on fish health. And Kristin, maybe you can start us off. I mean, I mean, what are you looking at in terms of climate change specifically? Are you concerned about heat waves, algal blooms? What are you looking at in terms of as a company, and how you hope that you can kind of mitigate or adapt to this?
I think probably the biggest impact that we're seeing is more extreme weather events. And, those weather events are having quite a catastrophic effect depending on, whether that's extreme rainfall. I mean, last November in Vietnam, there were 4 typhoons that blew through in November alone, which is unprecedented and obviously has a huge impact, when you look at an area like Mekong Delta or even the central growing area. So where we see those extreme weather events is, obviously quite impactful for the whole industry. Of course, you get algal blooms and things like this as well, but overall, the frequency of those events is becoming more and more, and so I guess the overall impact is becoming increased and increasing in frequency. And that's what we're seeing from our farmers.
Thank you for that. And Andreas, I mean, how are you dealing with the impacts of climate change on your fish stock?
No, I think the first thing I would say is I think it's going to impact everybody, the whole world, whether you are land-based RAS or you are pond-based or you are ocean-based. I think we're all going to be faced with challenges coming from climate change, whether it's change in salinity, whether it's rivers going above or beyond, affecting the water supply, or whether in an ocean setting you have higher waves, you have tornadoes, typhoons, you have, and I think also the rising water temperatures, which is going to certainly impact some species. I think the tropical species are probably somewhat better off in that they actually tend to thrive with higher temperatures. So a few percentage of a few degrees higher would probably actually benefit Barramundi as a species. Whereas I think for salmon, there could be some challenges with a 2-degree increase in temperatures. So I think that's why I think it's really hard to be exactly who's going to be the winners, but I think it will certainly impact everybody, and I think Kristin's actually right. It's actually right. It's something we have to be prepared for.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. And maybe we can talk a little bit about the role of predictive analytics. How accurate is it at the moment in detecting disease early enough? I don't know, Kristin, would you like to talk about smart farming or aquatech? Would you like to start us off on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's certainly something that we've actively been working on, and I think it starts from disease is a big topic, right? And I don't think there's any silver bullet. It's not like I can do, I do the feed and everything's going to be okay. I mean, we really need like an ecosystem here of let's say a coalition of the willing, across farmers, across technology suppliers, across feed, across genetics, all and vaccines. All of these things come together to mitigate. And one of the things we've started to develop is partnerships in predictive analytics around disease. And we're seeing actually some really interesting technology coming through in satellite imaging and satellite imaging linked with AI. And we can really start to see, like Sophie was saying before, when farmers are sort of clustered in a small area, those diseases can transmit quite quickly across different farms. And what we're able to see is, if a farmer is harvesting early and through color of the water, et cetera, then we can quickly communicate with the people in that area that there's potentially a problem in the area. And if you take the position of prevention is better than a cure, I mean, 2 or 3 days being able to warn that there is a disease in the area, take precautions, that can make a significant difference to the productivity and the yield of those farms. So it's certainly in its infancy, but we have got tests underway, and we're starting to see some interesting data coming out of those tests.
Great. Sophie, do you have anything to add about the role of AI and machine learning in terms of predicting diseases in fish?
Sure. Well, because I'm an epidemiologist, so data's good. I think the key is that they need to collect the data. And how do you collect the data? And whether the farmers want to collect the data is part of the is the starting point. And the smaller farmers tend not to collect as much data. But what we saw actually and this is now in the salmon industry fairly standard in Norway, in Chile, in Canada, and Scotland, they will report different diseases, and they'll report different lice counts because they have a lice. Lice can get out of hand if they're not on top of it. So that data is usually shared among the farmers. And that's exactly what Kristin said. If you have some early warning, you can be prepared and do an earlier treatment or synchronize your treatment so you don't have to treat as much. It's basically one big farm these days. So it allows them to have an early detection system. They do need to collect the data. And I think sometimes, at least in the small farms that I've worked on, they don't get the diagnoses. They don't get the water quality. They do. Most places actually have this type of system in place for algal blooms. So, it's a start, but it could be expanded for sure. And if you want to do disease modeling, then you really need good data. So there are some tools out there now for ISAV, the viral disease in Chile. There are sea lice tools that can predict where problems are going to be given a certain status of infections in a bay or in an area like a larger span area. But these are a little bit, they're more experimental and research based, but they could be used by industries if they had a problem. I don't know how quick they would be to put in place, but.
Thank you for that. Great. I mean, we're coming close to the end of our time there, but I'd like to ask one more question, which I think a lot of people in the world are worried about, is the impact of microplastics on fish health and obviously then on human health. Maybe Andreas, we could get your thoughts on this. I mean, we know there are some studies out there suggesting that, microplastics can cause aneurysms and damage gills. I mean, how concerned are you about this as a company, and what would you like to see happen? I mean, how can we monitor or detect this better?
No, I think that's it's a big concern, I think, for many, and certainly something that we are monitoring. I think I don't have the actual solutions for this, but it's something that I think we need to I think we monitor it as a company. We have fairly limited, I think, influence on that. But I certainly, I mean, we have recently partnered with WWF to work with them on working towards further accreditations, working on ASC. In that, we have our philosophy is to use the oceans as the beautiful place it is, as the world's largest untapped resource, to produce fish proteins in the probably the most sustainable way that you can produce any animal, any protein. So I think in that we need to preserve the oceans. We need to do what we can to protect them, and so we're very proud to be partnering with all these different organizations to help, I would say, limit the use of plastics and microplastics. So we try to do our part.
Thank you. And Sophie and Kristin, any final words on how we can better deal with microplastics and their impact on fish health? Very quickly, thank you.
I'll just mention that with fish health, it's more of a chronic issue. So we tend not to have the health issues are probably underlying, and they're not as clear as an infectious disease. So a little bit harder to pinpoint. But certainly the feeds are of what farmers are wondering about too. So maybe I'll let Kristin talk.
Yeah, I mean, so we make sure that there's zero microplastics in anything that is in our feeds, and we believe that's a key responsibility that we have to the industry. I mean, the last thing people need is feed full of microplastics and fillets and things like this. So absolutely something that we don't do.
Okay, well, look, thank you so much. And that's amazing discussion. Sorry, we run out of time. So I think we've raised some really important issues today, especially around antimicrobial resistance and the effective way of using vaccines. So I think that's going to be really interesting for all our listeners. So many thanks, Andreas, Sophie, Kristin, for your time and insight, and for you listening. And do stay on for the next session. Innovation Showcase: how could cultivated fish technology make a sustainable contribution to growing consumer demand for protein? Thank you very much.